A long, scorching summer afternoon in western Georgia. The asphalt road stretched endlessly between two scorched forests with no people or cell phone signal. There, a graphite-colored Maserati sat silently, broken down by the roadside smoke rising from under the hood like a nameless curse. Ethan Walker, 32 years old, CEO of the most powerful tech conglomerate on the East Coast, sat inside the car, fury boiling in his chest. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, eyes darting to the platinum watch on his wrist. 11:43. Only 17 minutes left until the launch presentation for Project Aurora, the dream of his lifetime, was set to begin. No one knew he was here, and the irony was neither did he know what to do. His Italian silk shirt was soaked in sweat, his tie loosened, and his thin-soled leather shoes were completely unsuited for the gravelly roadside terrain. Ethan begrudgingly popped the hood, only to be blasted in the face by a wave of blistering heat rising like coal smoke. He knew nothing about engines. Not a single component looked familiar. The man who had once commanded the tech world now stood bewildered before a machine any garage mechanic could name bolt by bolt. And then, that sound, not a helicopter, not a tow truck, just the engine of an old paint-chipped pickup truck slowing down and stopping a few feet away. The door opened. A woman stepped out. She wasn't wearing a blazer, no high heels. Her curly hair was tied back neatly, her dark skin glistening under the sun, and her calloused hands stained with old grease. A striped button-up shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her face wasn't unfamiliar, but Ethan couldn't place it. She didn't ask many questions, just walked toward him, eyes steady and calm. "Need a hand?" Her voice was low, clear, and without a trace of hesitation. Ethan frowned. "I have a critically important meeting in 15 minutes. My assistant was supposed to send a tow truck, but this place has no signal." The woman glanced at the car, utterly unfazed by his irritation. She leaned in, inspecting the engine bay like a doctor examining a dying patient. "Cooling system. I can patch it up just enough to get you back to the city." She gripped a valve. Ethan hesitated. He scanned her from head to toe, mud-caked boots, oil-stained fingernails, but her eyes were forged steel. "Are you sure?" "It's what I do," she replied, voice dry and steady. "I'm a mechanic. My shop's 10 miles down the road." She didn't wait for his approval. She turned back to her truck and opened the toolbox. In that moment, Ethan stood still. Not because he felt insulted, but because for the first time that day he felt out of control. And there was something in the firmness of her stride, in the way her eyes never flinched, made him feel strangely small. Brielle Carter returned with a small silver toolkit, her footsteps confident across the melting asphalt. She didn't rush, but she didn't drag either. Every movement was precise, popping the cap, reattaching the hose, adjusting the thermal valve, checking coolant levels, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Maybe she had. Ethan stood nearby, silent. His eyes, used to scanning financial charts and investment reports, were now fixated on oil-stained fingers gliding through the engine with surgical precision. Who was this woman? And why? Couldn't he look away? "You know," Brielle said, not looking up, 5 more minutes, and you'd have destroyed the whole engine. These models are powerful, sure, but delicate. Like some people." Ethan blinked. He knew that line wasn't just about the car, but he didn't have the mind to respond. His eyes were fixed on something odd, a ring on her finger. Old silver set with a small scratched sapphire. But it still held a soft blue shimmer like a morning lake. That ring. A gust of memory swept through him. A large tree, a little girl with wild curls. A promise. And a silver ring slipped onto a tiny finger. He once called it a token of forever. Ethan gasped, chest tightening, like a blow had struck him. That ring. Where did you get it? Brielle looked up for the first time since she began working. Her eyes slowly scanned his face, not surprised, not emotional, just the guarded stare of someone who had once been abandoned. It was my mother's, she replied, her voice calm, but her hand instinctively curled, shielding the stone. Why do you ask? Ethan took a half step back. The hot wind blew, but a chill ran down his spine. It couldn't be. 20 years had passed. That little girl, what was her name again? He used to remember every feature, every word, but he had also been taught that forgetting was the best way to survive in the adult world. He swallowed hard. Did you live at Orion Orphanage? Brielle said nothing. A tremor rumbled through the ground, unseen by all, but Ethan felt it. The world had just started to shift. Ethan Walker felt like he'd been yanked out of reality. In front of him, Brielle Carter, the 26-year-old mechanic standing silently beside the newly revived engine, was no longer a stranger. Everything came rushing back like a film in reverse: the rusted fences, the Orion Orphanage, the first rain of the season that year, and the little girl with big round eyes who rarely spoke, who used to collect wood scraps and carve them into birds. The little girl named Brielle, he said out loud, as if confirming it to himself. It's you. She froze. The wind stopped blowing. So you do remember, she said, voice low, not raised, but cold as the edge of a thin blade. After 20 years, among thousands of people, in a world where everyone has the right to forget. You remembered. Ethan took a quick step forward. I don't know what to say. I thought you'd moved away, or you thought I'd just vanish like some childhood dream. She cut him off, her eyes sharp like shattered glass. And what about me? I waited. A week, a month, a year. That little girl you promised to come back for stood at the orphanage gate every afternoon until she stopped believing in wind, in birds, in return. Ethan stepped back, not out of fear, but shame. A kind of humiliation too complex to name, standing before someone you once abandoned. Not with action, but with the silence of passing years. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered object engraved with the image of a bird in mid-flight. Do you remember this? Brielle looked at it. One beat. Then another. The wooden pin. Her first carving, gifted to Ethan as a farewell, a silent promise, I'll wait. It was still there. The wood hadn't broken. But her heart had. You kept it. She breathed, then stopped. Not out of sentiment, but because she wasn't sure if she was angry or overwhelmed. You kept it, but not your promise. Brielle turned away, hiding her emotions. The car's fixed. Go. Your meeting is far more important than a little girl who got left behind. Ethan wanted to say something, but no words could fill the 20-year void. She was already back in her pickup truck. He stood under the searing sun, but the heat didn't burn him. It was the silence of someone who once meant everything, but now was just a stranger with a name. Brielle's old pickup creaked as it turned onto the red dirt road leading to Hope Mechanical. Dust rose beneath the tires like long-buried fury being stirred. Inside the cabin, there was no music, only the growl of an old fan and thoughts crashing like nails dropped in a wooden box. She didn't cry, she didn't curse. She just gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. At the shop, Uncle Marcus was huddled under the hood of an old Mustang, adjusting the carburetor. He looked up and pushed his oil rag aside when he heard the familiar engine sound. Late today, girl. Something happened. His voice was deep but warm as always. Brielle didn't answer. She walked straight to the workbench, dragged out a chair, plopped down, peeled off her gloves, and exhaled hard like trying to expel every memory that had just come flooding back. Marcus frowned. Brielle. It was him, she said, not meeting his eyes. Ethan Walker. No need to ask further. He stopped what he was doing and held his breath. He didn't recognize me, Uncle. Didn't recognize my face, didn't recognize my voice. The only thing that made him stop was the ring, the last thing my mother ever gave me. Marcus sat across from her, his voice softer. What did he say? Not much. Not enough. Just the usual old apologies and a keepsake. The little wooden bird I carved and gave him the day we parted. Marcus sighed. You held on to hope all those years. It wasn't hope, Brielle replied, her eyes calm in an unsettling way. It was justice, identity. The one thing I had to clench my teeth to preserve when this entire town acted like my mother never existed. Brielle walked to the wooden shelf at the back and opened an old tin box. She pulled out a faded stack of documents. On top was a piece of paper bearing the Walker Enterprises logo. Richard Walker's signature crisp and cold as a blade. It was him. Ethan's father. He bought our land using forged documents. He faked my mother's death certificate. Every signature is real. It's undeniable. Marcus clenched his jaw. Brielle, this is dangerous. Walker's not the type to let anyone touch him. She turned back, eyes blazing. I have nothing left to lose. But he's going to lose everything he stole from my mother. A heavy silence fell over the shop, no more clinking wrenches or drilling sounds. Only the heartbeat of a woman who had once been a forgotten child, now pounded in time with the truth. The following afternoon, Hope Mechanical was quieter than usual. Brielle was crouched beneath the undercarriage of an old Chevy pickup, sweat tracing a line down her forehead. But her mind wasn't on the work. The image of Ethan, his stunned gaze at the ring, the wooden pin, the breathless words kept replaying in her head like a loop she couldn't stop. Then came the sound of a car engine pulling up outside the garage door. Not loud, not hurried, but it made her heart skip a beat. The door creaked open. Ethan stepped in, no longer wearing a suit, no expensive watch, no penthouse CEO swagger. Just an old t-shirt, simple jeans, and a small object wrapped in silk cloth in his hand. We close at 5, Brielle said, not turning around. I didn't come for the car, Ethan replied, his voice noticeably lower. I came for something I never made right. Brielle slowly stood up, wiping her hands on her shirt. Another apology. Ethan strolled toward her, then placed the cloth on the table. When Brielle unwrapped it, the wooden pin appeared, this time sanded smooth. The bird's wing was no longer broken, but mended with a different piece of wood, a scar but a beautiful one. I've kept it for 20 years, he said. It's the only thing I had left. The only real thing after my father erased every trace of my childhood at Orion. Brielle looked at him, not with the same coldness as before, but with something closer to doubt. Erased. Ethan nodded. My father didn't want anyone to know I was once an orphan. He built a new resume for me, a childhood wrapped in velvet perfect parents. And when I tried to talk about the past, he'd say, "That's a burden you don't need to carry." He stepped closer for the first time, not hiding his exhaustion. I didn't stay away because I forgot. I stayed away because I was forced to forget. Brielle said nothing. One part anger, one part sorrow. But somewhere in between was a question she hadn't dared ask until now. If he genuinely didn't know, then who had she been angry with all this time? You're getting engaged, she said, as if trying to sweep the rising emotions away. Natalie Brooks, heiress to the fashion empire. It's in every magazine. Ethan gave a faint smile. An arranged merger. She's smart, calculated. My father approves. But, he paused, locking eyes with her. She's not you, and I'm no longer the man they tried to manufacture. Brielle crossed her arms. Then why are you here, Ethan? For forgiveness, so I can call this an unfortunate mistake and we pretend it never happened. Ethan shook his head. No, I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to understand, and if you'll let me, to try and make it right in the only way I can, by standing with you. A gentle breeze swept through the garage. The door shifted slightly and late afternoon light filtered in, casting a soft golden hue over the wooden pin. In that moment, Brielle didn't respond. But she didn't ask him to leave either. The amber glow lingered over Hope Mechanical as the evening crept in. A place once filled only with hammers and drills now echoed with the rustling of papers and the weight of deep breaths. On an old wooden table, Brielle and Ethan sat across each other. Between them lay a sealed red wax folder, a thick envelope, and a satellite map printed in faint ink. All bore the official stamp of Walker Enterprises, Ethan's family company. Brielle opened the first file. Inside was a copy of Lena Carter's death certificate, her mother's signed and notarized in 2004. The problem was, Lena wasn't dead. Brielle knew that. Marcus knew that. And now Ethan sat frozen, staring at the printed cause of death: traffic accident. Not confirmed by a medical examiner. My father faked my mother's death, Brielle said, her voice level, each word like a nail driven into the table, and used that paper to seize the only land my family had left. Land that sits on the largest aquifer in the state. Ethan bowed his head, fists clenched, his knuckles white. Project Aurora. The entire new complex is built right on top of it. Brielle pushed another file toward him. The property transfer contract sold at a throwaway price, signed by someone who was never present, notarized by someone who had died 6 months before the agreement was drawn up. And this is the original file, Brielle added, pulling a large envelope from the drawer and sliding out a paper with faded ink and a fingerprint. My mother gave these to Marcus just before she disappeared. He hid them, waiting until I was old enough to understand. Ethan looked up, eyes bloodshot. I didn't know. I swear I've never seen any of this. But now you have, Brielle replied, and I can't be the only one to face it. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll find the proof from inside within Walker. If what my father did is true, I can't stay silent anymore. Brielle looked at him, as if seeing maybe for the first time not Ethan Walker, the CEO, but Ethan the boy who once promised he'd come back on a summer afternoon long ago. She opened the map, pointing to a patch of dense forest nearby. I think my mother's still alive. There's a Walker-owned facility registered as a private rehabilitation center, but no patient records. No one in, no one is out. I believe she's being kept there. Ethan blinked. This isn't just land theft. This is kidnapping, illegal detention. And if you stand with me, Ethan, this won't just bring down a project. It'll collapse your father's entire empire on blood silence and forged documents. He exhaled deeply, then nodded. Then where do we start? That night, while the entire city of Aurora quietly prepared for the grand opening of the most modern complex in Aurora Prime project, a different kind of preparation was taking place in a small room behind Hope Mechanical. Brielle laid out each file across the table: forged death certificates, illegal land transfer contracts, threatening letters, and a map marking the location of the suspected detention facility. They were all organized into separate piles marked with sticky yellow notes. At the top was an old photograph of her mother, Lena Carter, the woman who had been declared dead for 20 years. Tomorrow, no one will be able to deny it anymore, she said, her eyes fixed on the faded text of the copied documents. No, Ethan replied. Not tomorrow. Brielle turned. What do you mean? My father moved the event to tonight. I just received the internal memo. He's afraid of leaks. He wants to strike first. She clenched her fingers. All the better. The more unexpected, the less time they'll have to sanitize the scene. Ethan pulled up a chair. I can access the entire event's audio, lighting, and projection systems. I'll add your name to the guest speaker list if you agree. You'll have a microphone, a spotlight, and an audience that won't be able to look away. Brielle raised an eyebrow. You do know this could cost you everything, right? Ethan smiled that, for the first time, carried no power. Swagger, only faith in what's right. I lost myself 20 years ago. I'm not afraid to lose anything else. That evening, the event unfolded under golden lighting, with designer suits, expensive champagne, and laughter echoing like a symphony of wealth and power. On stage stood Richard Walker, the man Fortune magazine once called the icon of economic revitalization. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice deep and resonant. The Aurora project is not merely a development. It is a symbol of vision, of belief in a sustainable future. He didn't get to finish the sentence before the giant LED screen behind him went black. Then it lit up again, displaying a death certificate. Gasps rippled through the audience like wildfire. A woman's voice rang out from the crowd, calm, clear, unshaken, unafraid. And it is also a symbol of theft, of lies, and of a mother who was declared dead, so her land could be turned into an empire. Every eye turned to Brielle Carter, strolling toward the stage. In her hand was a thick folder. Behind her was Ethan, saying nothing, only walking beside her like someone prepared to stand through anything. Richard Walker. Brielle said, eyes locked on the man who had forced her mother to vanish. Do you know who I am? He squinted, voice dripping with contempt. How much do you want to keep quiet? Brielle stepped up to the podium. I don't want money. I want the truth to be called by its rightful name. The audience fell into a stunned silence. Cameras from major news outlets began to roll. And then, almost as if fate had timed it perfectly, the back doors of the auditorium burst open. A woman with graying hair, walking slowly but steadily, entered. Her eyes met Brielle's, and in that instant, years of burial cracked open like rivers running backward. My daughter, the woman said softly, but her voice carried to the farthest row. Lena Carter, the woman who was forced to die on paper, was now stepping into the light. The entire auditorium froze. Richard Walker went pale, but he didn't yet realize the worst was still coming. Natalie Brooks, Ethan's fiancée, stood silently in the distance, her phone recording the entire scene. No one had expected that the woman hidden for 20 years would be the fatal blow that shattered the Walker empire. The lavish room, meant for the grand opening, had lost all its grandeur. No one was paying attention to the gleaming glass building behind Richard Walker. Every eye was locked on the center stage, where Lena Carter and Brielle faced each other after 2 decades of forced separation. My daughter. Lena repeated this, time her voice trembling, though her eyes stayed glued to Brielle's face. Brielle stepped forward slowly, eyes red with emotion. Mum. There was no theatrics, no background music, no scripted dialogue. Just 2 women embracing in the middle of a crowded room, as if all the crimes, all the forged documents and twisted lives led back to this moment, hearts finally reunited. The entire room held its breath. The cameras kept rolling, and Richard Walker stood frozen in place. Then Ethan's voice rang out, calm but piercing, directed at the man who had raised him on lies and reputation. Father, he said, why did you imprison her? Richard let out a dry laugh. I gave her a comfortable life. A house, private doctors, organic food, elite medical staff, all to keep her quiet. Lena raised her head, eyes never leaving his. You didn't keep me silent. You kept me because you feared the truth. This, Ethan stepped back, is not just land theft. This is kidnapping, forgery, the destruction of a family for personal gain. Why do you think I chose you as my son? Richard sneered. You think it was love. You think you were lucky to be rescued from the orphanage. The room turned ice cold in an instant. Ethan froze. What are you saying? Richard pulled a folder from his jacket and flung it onto the table. Papers spilled out, including an adoption file signed when Ethan left Orion. The last line made Ethan's heart nearly stop. Mother's name, Lena Carter. Birth name, Ethan Carter. No one spoke. Even Brielle stood frozen. Ethan slowly turned to her. Your last name is Carter. Brielle nodded faintly in disbelief. She stepped back, eyes darting as if searching for an explanation that didn't exist. Lena stood up, her voice catching. You're both my children, siblings, born 1 year apart. When he took Ethan from me, I couldn't fight to keep both. I lost my daughter, and they wouldn't let me keep my son. Ethan whispered almost to himself. So, my father wasn't my father. Richard didn't deny it. You were a replacement. My real son died when my wife had a miscarriage. You were easy to control, no questions, no hereditary diseases, perfect to rebuild the family name. I didn't need blood, I needed obedience. Brielle stepped back, hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. She had thought Ethan was the betrayer, then the redeemer. But now he was her brother, her blood, a piece of herself that had been stolen. No, this can't be, Ethan whispered, tears finally falling. Lena stepped forward, taking both of their hands. We can't get back the 20 years we lost, but if you want, we can start over. As a family for the first time, for real. Outside the hall, police sirens began to wail. In Natalie Brooks's hand, the fiancé-turned-pawn was a USB drive packed with videos, documents, and Richard's confession. Silently, she handed it to the investigating officer. As security escorted Richard away through a sea of cameras, he turned to look at Ethan, not with the eyes of a father, but with the look of a man who had just lost his final trump card. Less than 48 hours after the grand opening, a ceremony that was supposed to mark a historic turning point for Walker Enterprises, everything had crumbled like a sandcastle, quietly swept away by an undertow. Across every significant front page, from the New York Times to the Los Angeles Tribune headlines, ran like a verdict without trial. Billionaire Richard Walker arrested for kidnapping, fraud, and document forgery, spanning 2 decades. Images of him in handcuffs, head bowed, eyes panicked, were shared millions of times overnight. The ensuing investigation uncovered a network of corrupt practices, phantom contracts, covert holding facilities, falsified adoption files, and dozens of families driven from their ancestral lands through deceitful means. Ethan didn't dodge the media. On the contrary, he held a press conference not as a CEO or the heir of the Walker Empire, but as Ethan Carter for the first time. The name Walker no longer represents me, he declared. I am the son of Lena Carter, the younger brother of Brielle Carter, a man who was taken from his family to serve a dream he never chose. From today, I reclaim my name and begin the journey to restore everything my family once lost. With that, Ethan announced the launch of the Carter Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting families displaced by force, providing free legal aid for victims of document fraud, rebuilding communities that had once been stripped of their rights by Walker Enterprises. The land where the company had planned to build its financial hub right over Georgia's most extensive underground aquifer was officially transferred back to the Carter family, not for exploitation, but for preservation. It was renamed the Carter-Lena Preserve, now home to a natural park, a community center, And most importantly, the Lena Carter Memorial Home is a space chronicling the fight of a woman once forced to die so that an empire could live. 6 months later at Hope Mechanical, now transformed into a combined auto shop and free vocational training center. Brielle was bent over the hood of an old Toyota, her hair tied back, hands greasy, but her smile bright as new sunshine. Not far away, Ethan was seated signing off paperwork for a new land grant aimed at minority communities. Around his neck hung a leather cord with the wooden bird pin, a once shattered relic, now a symbol of rebirth. "How does it feel?" Brielle asked, glancing up at him. "Knowing your life was built on a lie." Ethan looked up and smiled a smile Brielle had never seen on him, back when he bore the Walker name. Strange, but also freeing, because finally I'm no longer living in someone else's shadow. He turned toward his mother, Lena Carter, who was calmly pouring lemonade on the porch of a wooden house. Her face bore the lines of time, but her eyes held the serenity of a woman who had reclaimed her dignity with her hands. The sapphire ring still rested on Brielle's finger like an invisible red thread that had somehow stitched all the scattered pieces back together. "Your grandmother once told me," Lena whispered, placing the tray on the table, "that this ring always finds its way home. No matter how many hands it passes through or how long it's lost, it will return to the one it belongs to." Brielle smiled gently, tightening her fingers around the band, and this time she said softly, "It didn't come back alone." Spring came early in Aurora. Trees along the hills began to bud, and flocks of birds returned to perch on the wooden fences of the Carter-Lena Community Center, the place that once housed the dreams of a deceitful empire. Now it hosts free classes in auto repair, entrepreneurship, and resume writing for those long overlooked by the system. On the large wall of the main building, painted by hand in sapphire blue, were the words, "No one is meant to be forgotten." In the workshop, Brielle taught a young boy how to install an exhaust pipe. He was about 13, stubborn, and full of questions like she used to be. Ethan stood nearby, taking notes for next year's program funding, each on their task but walking the same path finally without distance. After class, Brielle sat alone on the steps, the setting sun casting golden light over her hand. The old sapphire ring still glimmered gently. She turned it slightly, a habit born from the days when there was no mother, no one to trust, only a promise. Ethan walked over and placed a wooden box beside her. No need to ask, Brielle opened it. Inside was the wooden bird pin, now accompanied by a certificate, Center for Children Who Lost Their Mothers, Orion Branch, founded under the names Brielle Carter and Ethan Carter. "This is what we never had," Ethan said, "and now it's time to give it." Brielle nodded, no words were needed. From afar, Lena Carter approached, holding her usual pitcher of lemonade, smiling at her two children. A gentle wind blew, sunset light bathed the three, once separated by money status and power but now united by truth and choice. "You know," Lena said, "this ring once belonged to your grandmother. Every woman in our family passed it down to her daughter. But with me, I couldn't do it the traditional way." Brielle clasped her mother's hand, her gaze softening. "You don't have to follow the old ways anymore, because we're rewriting the story." Lena smiled, tears shimmering at the corners of her eyes. In the back room, the TV played the evening news. Richard Walker had officially been indicted on 17 counts, including unlawful imprisonment, document forgery, and conspiracy to acquire property through illegal displacement. The sentence could be up to 75 years in prison. But to Brielle, justice didn't lie in the sentencing. It lived right here in this moment, where she no longer had to ask for permission to exist, to be believed, or to speak. The ring remained on her hand. The wooden bird rested beside Ethan, Small, forgotten relics now stood as unshakable symbols of family of truth and of a power that had once been suffocated in silence. Because sometimes the greatest empires don't collapse under hammers, but from a single unseen crack born of something unexpected family. The story ends not with triumphant fanfare, but peace for the first time in 20 turbulent years. A conclusion that requires no blood, only the courage to face the past, forgive oneself and begin again. Not just the fall of injustice, this was the restoration of a name, a ring and a promise that time could never erase.